Hi, yes, my name is Tiffany Music. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you. Just give me one second. Okay, can you see this? I'm hoping, I'm hoping yes. Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So as Alicia mentioned, I am a life and leadership coach, and the work that I do with my clients really focuses on helping them work toward personal and professional goals with an emphasis on increasing self-awareness and self-compassion. And within that work, I do a lot of work on cultivating mindfulness, which is what I'm going to be talking with you all about today. So, first of all, as we get started, I think that we can all agree that life can get really busy, really crazy. So, between all of our responsibilities, work, family, errands, sometimes life feels a little bit like this, right? A little bit of a blur. And in this chaos, sometimes it's hard to just slow down and enjoy what's going on. And it's harder still to show up as the person we want to be, right? The coworker, the spouse, the friend, the parent that we desire to be. And this is where mindfulness comes in. So, mindfulness helps us slow down, take a look around, take a look inside, and determine how we want to show up differently in our lives. And so we'll take a little bit of time to dive into what mindfulness is exactly. It's a really frequently used term, but we'll just take a moment to dissect it a little bit. So the first definition we're going to look at is from John Kabat-Zinn, who is really a key figure in the world of mindfulness, and more specifically in bringing mindfulness, the concept, the practice, to the Western world. So it has really deep roots in different religious practices, especially in the Eastern world, but really within the last several years, it's become a more popular concept here. And so the definition that he provides is that mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non judgmentally. And the second definition we're going to look at is from the American Psychological Association, which defines it as a moment to moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. So, as you look at these definitions, you'll probably notice two key commonalities that we're going to dive into a little bit more. So, the first is they both reference this idea of awareness and bringing our awareness to the present moment. So, we can do this through a number of ways through observing our thoughts, what we're thinking in the present moment, our emotions, what we're feeling, physical sensation, so bringing focus to our physical body, what we're feeling, surroundings, and this is where we really engage with our senses. So, what can I see? What can I hear, smell, taste, feel, or touch? And then behaviors. So, what am I doing in the present moment? Or what do I have the urge to do? What do I really want to do in this present moment? And the second part of the definition, the second kind of core concept, is this idea of suspending judgment. So, as we begin to notice what we're thinking, feeling, experiencing, just noting that these things aren't right or wrong, they're not good or bad, they just are. They're part of the human experience. They're part of what it means to be alive, right? And because of that, we can begin to replace judgment. So, this idea of I shouldn't be feeling this way or I should be feeling a different way with curiosity. So, why am I feeling this way? What's prompting this experience that I'm having? So, really just kind of again replacing that more critical voice with one of openness and curiosity. So, as we talk about creating more awareness and more curiosity, we find that mindfulness really requires us first and foremost to pause, to slow down, and to create space in our life. And I want to just go ahead and say that this space doesn't have to be, hours, even several minutes. It can be moments, it can be seconds, it can be a 30-second pause to just stop and notice. But that pause is really, really crucial for being able to create more awareness. Um, and so we'll look a little bit now at kind of the benefits. Why should we practice mindfulness? Why is it so important? Before we get into talking a little bit more about how to practice and some practical applications of it. So one of my favorite quotes, it's often attributed to Viktor Frankl, who is a writer, psychiatrist, philosopher, Holocaust survivor, an amazing person. And the quote is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space." So this is that pause that we're talking about. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So essentially, in between something happening outwardly, right? An encounter, an exchange, an interaction with somebody, and what we do in response to that, there is a moment where we get to choose. We get to choose how we want to show up. We get to choose how we act or what we say. And I want to just take a moment to kind of point out that he talks about response here, right? And reactions are a little bit different than responses. So reaction happens immediately. And it's often not something that I have control of, right? Something happens and I immediately feel, maybe I feel frustration, maybe I feel anger. But a response is something that I choose. So my reaction might be one of anger. My response can be one of compassion. So the reaction is really about what's happening internally, my internal experience, whereas my response is about how I act and engage with others. So just a quick clarification there. And within that, we'll go a little bit more into why it's helpful to practice mindfulness. And I'll just say before I go into this that a lot of the points I'm going to be making are pulled from the Greater Good Science Center out of Berkeley, that does a lot of research, has a lot of information about mindfulness, what it is, why it's helpful, and how to practice it. So it's a great resource if you want to learn more about mindfulness. So, practicing mindfulness helps us in several ways. The first of which we've already talked about a little bit, which is slowing down. It's creating that pause in your life rather than living in that state of a blur, right? If we go back to that picture I had on that first slide of just things being chaos, things kind of being blurred around us, it's just slowing down. The next thing is just being present. So oftentimes we spend our time thinking about the future. So we would call this worrying, right? So worrying about things that are going to happen tomorrow or next week, a meeting that we have coming up, some plans that we have for the weekend, right? And we get kind of caught up in what could happen, what might happen, what we want to happen. And the other side of that is we often get caught up in thinking about the past, right? So things that happened yesterday, replaying a conversation or a meeting at work, right? And kind of thinking about maybe what went wrong with it or how we wish we would have done something different. And this is what we call ruminating. So it's really being stuck in a cycle of thinking about the past. And both of these things, worrying about the future, ruminating about the past, actually tend to increase our stress levels. So being present really aids in helping to lower those stress levels, coming back to the present moment, what I'm experiencing right here and right now. And as we slow down and become more present to what we're experiencing, we can begin to notice patterns and trends. So it no longer feels like this mysterious thing, what I'm feeling or how I'm responding. We tend to notice, oh, when this happens, I tend to feel this way. Or when this happens, I tend to respond in this way. And so we begin to see that there is some rhyme and reason to what we think and how we feel and how we act. And as we notice those patterns and trends, um, and can bring some curiosity to those patterns and trends. Why am I doing these things? What's prompting it? It also allows space for us to maybe start to consider new ways of thinking or acting that could serve us better. And so I want to offer that this part takes a lot of time, right? So just because we notice patterns, just because we start to become more aware of things, doesn't mean that things are going to change automatically. It's certainly not going to happen overnight. But what we can do is kind of think of awareness as the building block. It's a foundation that we need to lay in order to make change. So that's kind of the first step, very, very crucial step. And then reducing stress. And so I already mentioned this with the worry and the ruminating, right? That tends to increase stress. Um, Mindfulness helps us to focus less on what is out of our control. So things that haven't happened yet, things that already happened, and focus more on what's present and right in front of us. And finally, as we do all of these things, it impacts our ability to just enjoy our lives a little bit more, to notice the small things that give us joy, that feel really satisfying, and that make us really thankful for the lives that we have. And I know that these are all kind of a little bit more broad impacts of mindfulness. And so, what I want to do is also take a little bit of time to talk about how this translates a little more practically in our day to day. So, being present, when we're more present with ourselves and to our own experiences, it also means that we can be more present with our families, with our spouses, with our kids. So, that work we're doing on our part to become more mindful, it really extends, it overflows to our other relationships as well. It helps us to not live on autopilot. I don't know about you, but I have this experience still where I get through a day or a weekend and someone asks me what I did, and I have to pause. And I'm like, what did I do? I don't even remember, right? It's just a blur. Or being in the car and driving from work to home or home to work and just zoning out, right? And I'm missing everything that's happening within those spaces. There's kind of these gaps of time where I'm not completely sure what happened because I wasn't super engaged. um, and so bringing mindfulness in helps us to kind of switch off of autopilot to be more engaged in these moments in our lives. As we become more practiced at mindfulness, we can also help our kids, our teens become more mindful as well, and specifically help them to become more aware of what they're experiencing. What emotions are they experiencing? What thoughts are they experiencing? And maybe giving them some space to put some language to these things. And there's research that shows that just as it's helpful for adults, for parents, that when kids are able to practice more awareness around their experiences, it also helps reduce their stress and increase their level of compassion and happiness in their lives. Improving communication. So, as we slow down and create space to get really curious, we can engage in more intentional and thoughtful communication rather than staying in a really reactive state. Which often isn't very fruitful. So, as we begin to increase our awareness of what we're experiencing, we can pass that information along to others. And one way to think about this is rather than communicating out of my anger, right, out of the reactive, angry state, if I can give myself a moment to pause and check in and get curious about that anger, what's prompting it, I can then provide that context from a much more calm and effective state. And then identifying unhelpful thoughts and actions. So this goes back to the noticing patterns and trends. So as we notice the patterns and trends, we get to start bringing that same curiosity to say, is this helpful? Is this serving me? Is this serving my family? And if not, what could be more helpful? What may be more helpful? And then navigating stressful moments with greater clarity. So when we go into a stress response, right, we're in a highly, highly stressful state, our body and our brain engages in a stress response. And this is often called our survival response, right? Our fight, flight, or freeze. And this really inhibits our ability to think calmly and rationally about what's going on. And so as we slow down and as we engage in mindfulness, it actually allows our body and our mind to slow down a little bit too, and for us to allow our thinking brain, our rational brain, to come back online and to think about things a little bit more effectively. And finally, finding more calm amidst busy schedule, right? Just not living life at warp speed at an unmanageable pace. Um, so next, we're going to talk about some practical ways to practice mindfulness. And so I have it broken down here in three just very, very brief, broad ideas, which we'll go through. And the first, again, is this idea of pausing, creating space, even if it's for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, slowing down, breathing. So, breathing is often a huge component in mindfulness practices or even meditative practices. And that's because focusing on our breath and deepening our breath really helps to calm our nervous system, right? It kind of helps with that stress response that I just talked about. And then finally, notice. And this is where we get really curious. Again, suspending judgment, just noticing, be an observer of ourselves. And so, what I would love to do is to actually take just a few minutes to practice it together. Um, and so, I am going to walk us through some questions that we can be asking ourselves, that you can be asking yourselves as you're starting your mindfulness practice. And what I would invite you to do, if you're able to, is to get in a comfortable seat in a relaxed but supportive posture. And if it feels comfortable to you, you're welcome to close your eyes. If it doesn't, that's completely okay. Just find something that feels good and comfortable. And we're going to go through this pause, breathe, notice. So, this is us intentionally pausing together, right? And we're going to start with just a few deep breaths. And so, I'll invite you to breathe in really nice and deep through the nose, filling the lungs, and then exhaling long and slowly through the nose or the mouth. And doing that again, just taking a nice deep breath, feeling those lungs expand, and then a long, slow exhale. And just one more time for good measure, the deepest breath that you've taken all day today. And let it go. And I'm just going to walk you through a few questions that you can ask yourself. So the first is, in this moment, how do I feel physically? How does my body feel? Am I tired? Am I tense? Am I relaxed? Does my head hurt? Are my eyes heavy? Just taking a moment to notice. How do I feel emotionally? Are there any emotions that are present for me right now? Do I feel anxious, frustrated, calm, happy? What am I thinking right now? Where is my mind being pulled in this moment? Am I focused on the things I need to do after this session? Am I replaying something that happened the other day? And I want to just give a quick reminder that as you're answering these questions, to try your best, again, this practice of suspending judgment. There are no wrong or right answers to these questions. They are not good or bad, it's just observing. Is there anything that I feel the urge to do right now? Any action that I really feel prompted to take? And another layer of that is, do I feel like that action would be helpful for me right now? And finally, what else do I notice? Anything else about my experience in this moment? Tapping into those senses. What can I hear, smell, taste, feel? Anything else that feels present. As we begin to kind of come out of this relaxed posture, begin to open the eyes, maybe take a little stretch or movement if you need it, and come back to the space. Maybe just taking note too. How was that experience? Was answering those questions easy, difficult? Were any of the answers surprising? Again, just observing, just being curious. And I want to offer too that we don't need to ask ourselves these questions every time we sit down to practice mindfulness, right? That was kind of a lot of questions. You can pick one question, you can pick two questions. You might find that there was one that really resonated or you really connected with. That's great. Use that. Find what works. So, this is just again an example of this practice of pausing, creating some space very intentionally, taking a breath, and getting really curious. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some practical practical tips and tricks for this because I know that one thing, especially as we're starting a mindfulness practice, is that it can feel like just another thing to do, right? Another thing that we add to our to-do list. But there are some ways to make it more practical and actually to make it a part of things that we're already doing. Um, so we can actually incorporate mindfulness into really most activities throughout the day, things that we already are doing or need to do. And so I've included some examples here. And one, for instance, is washing dishes, which we all tend to have to do at some point for a few minutes every day. And so even washing the dishes can be a mindful experience. Um, part of it can be, I don't know about you, when I wash dishes, I tend to zone out a little bit. So being more aware of where my mind is being pulled when I'm standing at the sink washing dishes. Um, or even tapping into our senses in this moment. So noticing the temperature of the water, noticing the smell of the dish soap that we're using, noticing the texture or the weight of the dishes that we're washing, right? So, really, anything can be made into a mindfulness practice. I included some others: taking the dog for a walk, helping your kids with homework, preparing or eating a meal. This is one of my personal favorites, just because there's colors, there's fragrances, there's textures, right? And then getting to sit down and really savor the work that you put into making it. And I also want to offer that even at work, even taking a moment um, before a meeting that you're really stressed about, to just breathe and to notice how you're feeling can be really helpful. And while you can practice mindfulness throughout the day, pretty much anytime, it is helpful when you're starting to build in a little bit more structure as you build the practice so that it becomes consistent. So, as with any practice, consistency really is key. So, as you're starting, a couple of things to keep in mind are scheduling moments for mindfulness throughout the day. And so, this might be actually adding it to your work calendar, blocking off some time, setting an alert or a reminder on your phone to pause just a couple times throughout the day. Um, Being really honest about finding a time that works for your schedule. So maybe it's in the morning before everyone gets up and you have a minute to yourself, or in the evening after the kids go to bed, or a lunch break. Just really kind of finding what makes the most sense for you. I'm also a really big advocate of keeping a notebook handy. So, um, writing things down is incredibly helpful. First of all, for just getting some of these thoughts out of our mind that's swimming with a ton of thoughts. And it also helps with noticing patterns and trends, right? So it's easy day to day to kind of forget how we felt the day before or the week before. So being able to refer back and to notice, oh wow, this has been pretty frequent for me, or I've been feeling this or experiencing this a lot for the last couple weeks. That's really interesting. Um, and then finding accountability. So maybe that's letting your spouse or a coworker or a friend know that you're working on this, and maybe even inviting them to join along, or to just offer accountability in a way that feels helpful. And then as you practice more mindfulness, maybe inviting your family to try it as well. And so this can be anything from making your family dinners more mindful. So putting phones away and maybe asking some questions that all brings everyone to the present moment to share their experiences. Or it could be noticing when they're having a moment of high stress and inviting them to do this practice of pause, take a breath, notice what's happening for you in this moment. And finally, I just want to kind of wrap up with this idea that we're really building a muscle here. So, like I said, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not a destination that we reach or a skill that we master, right? It's a practice, and it's just something that we keep doing over and over again. Um, but the great news is that the more that you exercise mindfulness, the stronger your practice will become over time. And the stronger that it becomes, the easier it's going to be to implement it, to be able to access it, especially in moments of high stress. It's going to feel a little bit more natural to go to a mindfulness practice if you're doing it on a regular basis. So, just a few things to keep in mind. Um, and with that, I am going to wrap up and just thank you all so much for your time and attention. I hope that this was helpful. Even if you're able to just pick one little tiny bit from this and use it, that's wonderful. And with that, I will pass it back over to Alicia.
Yes, thank you so much, Tiffany. I don't know about everybody else listening, but I know that was helpful for me. So I can only imagine that it's helpful for those listening as well. So thank you for taking the time to share your expertise on mindfulness. So I noticed that there's not any questions at the moment because I think Tiffany, you did a beautiful job of just very clearly explaining what mindfulness is, the benefit of it, and how we can use it. So with that being said, we have Monica here, who is our resource and referral manager at Say San Diego. She's going to pop on and share just a little bit about some resources that you can access in the community that have to do with mindfulness and kind of living a more mindful life. So, Monica, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Alicia. I totally agree. Actually, Tiffany, your voice sounds like one of those Calm apps. So it was like experiencing mindfulness while learning about it. So thank you. I am going to share my screen, and as Tiffany said, there are some, this is building a muscle, and what we want to do is give you some of the tools to help you be able to work that muscle out. That being said, actually the Spanish version of this is dropped into the chat. So for our Spanish listeners, you can access the Spanish version by clicking on the file in the chat box. I will be sending out the English and Spanish versions of both these sheets. So you don't have to, if you want to refresh your memory, you can always go back and listen to the video, or you can check out the cheat sheet that we'll be sending out via email that will have notes from today's presentation, along with other tools that you can use. So for the first one, taking care of yourself, we have the Say San Diego Wellness Center that has therapy for both youth and adults. And we have both licensed and pre-licensed therapists available. So if you are interested, you can always give us a call at our office, and we would love to help you. There's also a new resource, the mental health resources for youth, parents, and families. This was just released by the California Health and Human Services. It's a great website that has hotlines, warm lines, and other resources that can help as well. So for tools and strategies, a lot of the tools that Tiffany has mentioned, we've put on here. The website for the Berkeley resource, the reference that she was mentioning, is linked in the beginning. We also have the questions that she asked during the mindfulness exercise. So you can easily reach those if you are looking for some questions to help prompt. We also have a few articles and a grounding technique that is it's kind of like a little cute kid one. So if you want to post that up for your child to kind of help them be able to find some ways to ground themselves, that's available as well. For our San Diego locals, there are free Tai Chi classes that the County of San Diego Health and Human Services is offering. It's virtual and in person. So if you are curious about those, you can check those out as well. But as Tiffany said, you don't have to, if you don't want, it doesn't have to be this grandiose like event. It could be washing the dishes, thinking about it when you're eating. That is me, because I love to eat and I love bonding with the scenario, the experience. So if you're like me, it could be during eating. But it doesn't have to be this whole event. It can be very much just a part of your schedule. Asking for help. We do have family resource centers here at Say San Diego. We have a few, and oops, there we go. The locations are listed, will be listed on this sheet as well. If you have any questions, these are just a few of the services that we provide, along with some external services. But if you have any questions about any of the services that Say San Diego provides, please feel free to give us a call at the phone number below. That is our office line. You will reach our wonderful front desk staff and myself, yours truly, and we will do our best to help provide resources for you in addition to this sheet. That being said, I will patch it over back to Alicia.
Thanks, Monica. So Tiffany, we didn't have a question come in, but we did have a couple of comments just saying how helpful this was. So once again, thank you for coming and sharing with us. This brings us to the end of our wellness webinar. As a reminder, we do have one more presentation remaining this year, so keep an eye on your email for information regarding our next webinar. I think that's coming in November, don't quote me. But we just want to once again thank Tiffany, our wonderful presenter. Thank you for sharing all your expertise on this. Like I said, I just can't tell you enough. This is really helpful. So thank you. We also want to thank our Spanish translator for her time this evening. We really appreciate you joining us and hope that you have a very calm, peaceful, and mindful evening ahead. So thanks, guys.